on that note, and this is like a little, I'm not going to say secret sauce, but I think a major tip, because most people now are like, wow, this is already played out now. The auctions are really busy. The prices go really high.
Yep.
It's hard to actually get a huge win here. And I disagree. If you look at this in the way that you want to make a win, what you need to be doing is monitoring like crazy every single property that comes up for auction. And then you need to go and find the person that owns them, because when they first get listed and they're going up for auction, oftentimes a lot of people still live in the property. Or you find the person that owns it and you go and talk to them. And like, just think about this, okay? If someone's losing their house, it's worth $400,000. They owe $250,000 on it. You can go to them and say, hey, I'll buy your house right now, prevent you from having to file bankruptcy, and I'll pay off all your credit cards.
Yep.
So maybe I'll pay you $275,000. You're now coming out with a clean slate. You don't have to go through this whole process. You don't have to lose everything. It's actually a way to save it. And if you do that and you are relentless and you're constantly shopping, you'll probably get 1 to 2 properties a year. And I bet you can make a couple $100,000 doing that. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Canadian Private Lenders Podcast, a show covering the private lending industry, the mortgage broker space, and the Canadian economy. Your hosts are Neal Andrino and Ryan and Neal. Enjoy.
Everybody, welcome back. It's episode 67 of the Canadian Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts Ryan and Neal. Neal, how you doing, bud?
Frozen to the bone.
Frozen.
Holy God, the heat
yes,
doesn't work in
winter
the office.
sucks, doesn't it?
Winter sucks, especially when the heat in your office is just not cutting it.
Yeah, it's a little chilly in here, isn't it?
It's so cold.
Yeah.
Baseboard's cranked and the heat pump's on.
Would you rather be freezing cold, like inside, like in an office, or like boiling hot, like the AC not working?
Freezing.
Yeah,
you can layer up. Being hot's the most. Just
I feel like I can wear gloves in here right now, but but I would still rather this than being sweltering hot, right? Like,
it just sucks the life out of you when you're super hot.
Yeah,
like
you're right. You're absolutely right.
So I'm not. It's not the worst thing, and you can put some more.
It almost keeps you a little bit alert, eh? It's like having an extra coffee.
Yeah, that's something. It's like getting a cold plunge.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Neal, let's dive right into today's episode. So, want to touch on auction sales. I know you got some experience here. Really curious to hear about that. We may have talked about it in the past, but we'll go into a little bit more detail today, and specifically how auction sales can be financed as well.
Yep.
Right. So. Not necessarily the easiest thing to get financed in Canada. Obviously, it depends on jurisdiction. But anyways, before we dive into it, is there anything else you wanted to touch on? Anything on your mind? Any updates with politics or anything like that? Or are we good?
Nothing.
We touched on that enough last week.
We touch on that all the time. I mean, I think everyone knows that the market's turning in a lot of different ways. It's exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity to come, but I'm just, in general, everyone knows me as a nervous Nelly and a negative guy because I have been for a couple of years. I remind some people.
Nervous Nelly Neal.
Nervous Nelly Neal. I will remind some people there at some point I was Mr. Positive and Optimistic because I did go out there and make a ton of investments, buy businesses, buy real estate, trade stocks, buy crypto. I've done it all.
And you've been completely jaded by it all. And here you are.
I hate it all now. And I'm going back to my 9 to 5. But no, so there was a point in time when I felt that it all made sense and I was very aggressive. And at that time, people thought I was insane because of how aggressive I was being.
Yeah.
But things made sense to me. And right now, and they haven't for about 18 months. And so that's why if you listen to all of the content or you chat with me in person, you're like, you just don't want to do anything. And I'm like, no, I do. I just don't feel great about where everything is right now.
You don't have to jump on every single opportunity either, right? Like, I think that's probably what separates the great investors from the mediocre ones, the ones who, jump at every single opportunity, whether it's real estate or crypto or whatever else. And, you learn from your mistakes and, it's often prudent to say no to things too, right?
100%. So anyways, I thought I would just open with that because I get a lot of feedback that I'm super negative, but just
for sure.
Again,
for sure.
There was a time I was positive.
Neal, to kick us off here on the auction sales, can you kind of go through and talk about what scenario would lead to a potential auction sale?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, from the perspective of how a home gets to an auction sale is if someone doesn't pay, it could be also property tax or their mortgage.
Yep.
And so the home gets foreclosed on either by the city or by the lender that has the money owing. And so in that process, they need to go to auction. Actually, they don't need to. I've come to find out, but usually they need to go to auction to be potentially sold at auction prior to then maybe going to market. Yep. The auction is run by the courthouse locally in that jurisdiction, It's public, so everyone can come, and basically you're going to have obviously the judges or whoever's managing the auction, the bank that is owed the money, or the person that is owed the money, and then anyone else who's come to bid on the home.
Yep.
In a property tax sale, it's the same thing. But it's run by the municipality, and they're also typically quite busy because they usually lump together like 30, 40 properties at once.
Yep.
And it's also an outstanding tax bill, which is typically a lot less than a mortgage or a loan bill. So there's an opportunity to pick up the property for a lot less at a tax sale.
Yeah, and that's what makes this attractive to real estate investors, and really the key point in us in talking about this.
Yeah.
So to summarize your points, Neal, so foreclosure auctions typically are court ordered, often a lender enforcing on a borrower who hasn't paid, and municipal tax sales for unpaid property taxes. Those are the two key reasons why a property would go to auction.
Yep.
Of course, auction processes differ across different provinces, right? Mm-hmm. So there's foreclosure auctions in British Columbia, same here in Nova Scotia, versus the power of sale process in Ontario. We're not going to go deeply into that, but there is some nuances different by province. And of course, even county or municipal differences also exist and could impact the processes and timelines as well.
Yep.
And timelines is a key thing here, as we've worked through in this business before. But one comment I wanted to make too is that auctions, at least locally here, I can't speak to across the country, but have been less prominent in the last several years. And the reason for that is largely just the price appreciation we've seen in many Canadian urban centers, right? So people who get in trouble with their taxes or get in trouble with their lender, rather than losing that property and letting it go to auction, they just simply list their property on the market. They can even list it at a discounted value, and they're probably still going to get enough to pay off all of their debts and maybe pocket a little bit of cash.
Very much so. I will say, when I started in real estate, like, the market was not hot and growing at all. And so oftentimes when they came to auction, I would check the outstanding balance, and it was usually as much or more than the property.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they had no choice.
Yep.
Because they're like, well, I'm underwater, so I just have to lose this thing.
Yep.
And then to your point, once COVID started, the listings on the auction just fell dramatically.
Yep.
Because people weren't not paying their bills, but because, to your point, they could sell them and typically profit.
Totally.
Because there's so much growth in the marketplace. It was saving everybody.
Yeah. And to that point, I can remember my early days in the industry, and, going back with working with a family business before, we had that issue where, we knew it was going to go to auction and we weren't going to get all of our money back. And those are painful. So hopefully we'll avoid any of those in the future. But, historically, auctions have been quite prevalent, and they do represent a key opportunity for real estate investors as well. So we're going to dive into that.
Yeah.
From a lender perspective on this, okay, so the lender, if you're a lender on this type of property, you're going to want to understand, of course, the local processes, whether it's in your municipal area or in your province, what the timelines are, and how the auctions are conducted. Are they going to be in person, or are they going to be online auctions? And I know locally here, it's always in person, is it not?
Yes.
Maybe that different in COVID, but
even COVID,
it was in person.
Yes, I believe so. But it's definitely in person now, and it was prior to COVID.
Absolutely. And of course, in seeking these types of opportunities, you can of course standard ways to build business. Build relationships with mortgage brokers, local real estate investors, lawyers who enforce on these type of scenarios, or even title insurance companies who are familiar with auction properties, which we're going to dive into a little bit more.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, how does one buy a property at auction? And this is specific to Nova Scotia. And this data is actually specific to a tax sale, but it'll also apply to what you would find with an auction due to foreclosure. Okay. So of course you could locate the current auction listings or tax sale listings, keeping an eye on local newspapers and municipal websites for announcements on tax sales or foreclosure auctions. These listings provide essential information about the properties, including location, outstanding taxes, and the date set for the tax sale.
Yep.
Okay. Conduct thorough property research. Before you commit to the purchase, you want to investigate the property thoroughly, checking out its physical condition, its zoning restrictions, any other relevant factors. But remember, some properties might be vacant land as well, or not even accessible.
And I was going to say, the non-accessible is a very common one.
Right.
So to put a quick note on this, I bought one of my very first properties through a foreclosure auction. And I will say I was shopping them for a long time. What I would do is I would get all the listings, and typically they're a week or two out for the auction. And then I would go and visit the physical property and walk around and try and peer through the windows to see what's going on. Because the outside a lot of time look fine. It'd just be overgrown grass and maybe a bad deck. But as you've all heard, there's a horror stories of people flooding their houses or leaving them very damaged when they leave. So I try and look to the windows to get an idea of how damaged the property was.
Right.
To the point where, like, I remember one time I climbed up like a ladder and was looking through the upstairs window because I found a ladder in the backyard.
Yeah.
But their houses are typically managed by companies that are designed to keep them from getting more damaged or broken into.
Yeah.
So they're usually pretty buttoned up, so you can't get inside. And at the same time, you can't bring like an inspector or an appraiser or anyone to the property. So you really need to go do your due diligence. The other thing is you wouldn't want to pay someone to come every time because you might go to 50 of them before you ever actually win one at auction.
Totally.
Yeah, and same with the land. You should go take a quick walk around the land, and land can be scary because there's a bunch of things. Like I'll see there's a lot of land parcels that come up at our local tax sale, and it's developers that have come to find out that they can't actually develop the land.
Right.
And so it's worthless.
Yep.
Or it's something that has an
environmental issue.
Exactly.
Yep.
There's also one that went recently that had a bunch of old cars way in the back of the land that had leaked all over the place.
Yeah.
And so there was a registered environmental issue on the property. So someone bought it thinking it was a great development site, and it may be still, but they're going to have to spend a certain portion of cash to get it environmentally remediated.
Yeah, exactly. So continuing on here, so of course you're going to want to understand the terms of the sale. So in Nova Scotia here, each municipality has its own set of terms and conditions, making things as complicated as possible for these tax sales.
Of course.
But these will outline the bidding process, acceptable payment methods, and other sale-related terms. And I believe, talk about your experience with payment methods.
Yeah, I can give a really quick story on mine. I had been to so many and I'd bid so many times, I just automatically assumed I'd never win because the bank always outbid me. Because it's not always released how much money the bank owes. Tax sale, it's always released. Foreclosure, it's not. And so I didn't know how much the bank owed on this property, and I just set a number to target my house or in my head of what I was willing to bid. So we were just going back and forth, and like it starts, they're like, okay, the opening amount of taxes and cost of auction is $12,000. So first bid's 12 grand. Then I would bid 20, they bid 30, 40, 50, and we're going all the way up. And my cutoff number was 100. And I think he bid 90, and I just said 100. And assuming he was then going to say 105 or whatever. Right. And then nobody piped up. And I had brought
shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It just hit me when they're like going once, going twice. I was like, oh my God, I'm the top bid.
Yeah.
And so I won the bid, but I had not brought what I needed, which is you have to bring, I think at that time it was 10% of the cash to
in a bank draft?
In the form of a bank draft. Yeah.
Okay.
To the auction. And so I won, and they're pretty strict in the fact that if you don't have it, it goes to the next bidder.
Right.
Now, when I was going and doing this, it would have been 2018, 2019. I was the only person in the room. Nobody cared about real estate at that time. Like there was not another person. It was me, the lawyers, and the bank.
Yep.
That was the only people that would be in there. And so because of that, I was like, oh, I'll run across the street. Like my bank's just across the street. And the judge was nice enough. He said, okay, look, I think he said 10 minutes. He literally put a timer on. And he said, you have 10 minutes to get done. So I sprinted out of the courthouse, ran across the street, like ripped a bank draft out, came flying back, and made the payment. But anyways, to answer that, and what you need to do is every auction is a little bit different, but on average, it's 10 to 20% as an actual physical deposit at the time, and then followed by full payment, usually within a week. And they'll give you obviously where to do so. The tax sales, I don't think they take bank drafts. So I think it actually might be cash at those. And I remember when I used to go to those a lot, like there's just like RCMP crawling through, or local police crawling throughout the auction house because people are all sitting there with their cash ready to make a payment. And there's literally a cash box up at the front that you can...
probably for the full tax amount too, right?
No, same thing. It's a partial deposit, and then you follow through with the remainder.
Okay.
But theirs is a little bit shorter. Like I think they might be a week, and the foreclosure might be 10 days or something. It's quite quick with the tax sales.
Okay.
But that just make sure you have your money ready to roll, because if you win, they're not messing around.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to wrap up here, and you touched on some of this, but of course you got to participate in the sale. So tax sales in Nova Scotia can either be held in public auctions or tenders. For auctions, you need to be present to place your bid. Okay. For tenders, you submit a sealed bid by a specified deadline. And of course, you got to complete the purchase, right? So as you just mentioned, Neal, if your bid's successful, you got to pay the bid amount. Yeah. It generally covers the owed taxes or any additional fees. And the payment structure may include an immediate deposit and a full payment within a given period, which you just outlined. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, of course, you're going to receive the property title. So after completing the payment, you'll obtain a tax deed for the property. And however, the redemption period that allows the original owner to pay off the taxes and regain the property can be there for a period of time.
Exactly. So two things. Receiving property title is not a set amount of days as anything with government and lawyers. It's just kind of a fugazi, and it can happen really quickly, or it can take 6 weeks.
Yep.
The second thing being, and what Ryan just alluded to, was a redemption period. This is applicable on property tax sales. Is with a property tax sale, the person can redeem their property literally up until the moment that it gets auctioned.
Mm-hmm.
So you could go there and show up expecting to auction or to bid on this property that you've looked at, you're fully committed, you found someone to give you the money to buy it or whatever, you've moved your funds to buy it, and they could show up at the auction and just pay the amount, the auction amount. Even if you bid 100,000, but they only owe 12,000,
Mm-hmm.
they can just give the 12,000 and sneak it out from under you.
Yep.
Not sneak it out from under you, basically protect their asset,
Yep.
Or keep their home or whatever it is. But just keeping that in mind. And you'll see that with Nova Scotia, they're pretty good, or Halifax, sorry, it's based on municipality. They update their website all the time. So the first day that the listings come out, and then maybe it's 3 weeks till auction, I never bother even looking because you get your hopes up for nothing because it's a huge list on day one. And by the 21st day, it's like a quarter of the list.
Yep.
Because there's a bunch of people who just forget to pay. Like
Fall off. Yeah.
on the first day, you're getting like huge developers coming on there with like super notable properties.
Right.
That's because they're just busy and might get missed in the wash of all the administration. And so it's like up for foreclosure. And it's like, oh, we're going to buy a property in downtown Halifax for $5,000.
Yeah.
Not going to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, just keeping that in mind.
Totally. So from a lender perspective, financing auction properties or auction purchases can be a bit challenging. Okay. So we're going to kind of walk through a couple of these challenges here. So one being title insurance. So title insurance, from my perspective, is absolutely critical. Like we never do a transaction of any sort without title insurance on the property.
Mm-hmm.
So this is essential for minimizing risk in private lending. And as mentioned, this is a must-have. Okay. So some title companies could be hesitant to insure auction properties due to potential title defects or unresolved liens, which we kind of touched on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
With that, with the title thing being a potential issue. But you're going to certainly, before proceeding on any transaction like this, you're going to want to ensure you've got a title insurer who's on board with the deal.
Yep.
Right. And of course, we touched on this already, Neal, but the lack of visibility to the property, right? Like you may not be able to get a proper appraisal done on this type of property.
Yep.
So, and that goes for the purchaser as well. So, you really want to be able to do whatever due diligence you can, whether, walking through the exterior, looking through the windows if you need to,
Mm-hmm.
looking at comparables in the same area and assuming that it's not in great shape inside,
Yep.
right? So, and I know you kind of touched on your experience here, Neal, but is there anything else you want to kind of touch on in terms of financing this? Did you end up financing that first one that you did?
No. So yes, I did finance it, but I had to borrow cash from a family member, not.
Got it.
Yeah. Because that's and they basically were unsecured.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
I could not get a lending institution to get engaged due to the fact that they couldn't get an appraisal to confirm its value, and they couldn't get a walkthrough even.
Yeah.
And then I did speak with some private lenders. The ones willing to do it wanted 30%, which, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah, and let's talk about how lenders can get creative in structuring those financing options here. So the easiest method here, and this goes for maybe more experienced real estate investors, would be cross collateralization. You just have another property that you secure.
Yep.
You've got the security, and then you help them with the purchase, right? So secure the loan with an additional property with clean title to mitigate your risks there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the easy one. That's not always available, of course, especially if it's someone who's new, who's getting into their first property.
Exactly. You need to have assets.
You need to have assets to be able to leverage that. Another one could be bridge financing, right? Providing a short-term financing for the auction buyers with a follow-up refinance once clear title is obtained. And you can mitigate this by going, maybe go really low loan to value on this. You could go 50% loan to value of the auction price and make them put a bunch of cash up front. Or you may have a borrower you've already lent to in the past that you trust and has had some success, and know that they're going to come through on this, and you feel a little bit better lending to someone like that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, untypical though, you probably would never get more than 50, just simply because you don't know what the heck's on the inside.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so a couple more just to summarize here, some practical tips for lenders. So, if you want to seek out these type of opportunities, you want to be networking with these auction buyers. I know us as a private lender, we get people who call us and say, do you have any properties coming up? Like, would love to get in on there. Could be attending these auctions to meet these local investors, or just offering, advertising that you offer these tailored financial solutions that align with auction purchasers' strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, due diligence of best practices. That could be collaborating with lawyers or title insurance who are experienced in these type of properties. and performing your own title searches or getting your lawyer to do that to identify any potential liens, unpaid taxes, or unresolved issues. And just to summarize, of course, we touched on this, but leveraging that title insurance to reduce your exposure as a lender and identify those title companies who are willing to underwrite auction sales and prioritize relationships with these firms.
Yep. So I guess as a recap, just making sure that you do your due diligence. That is
absolutely.
It's limited in this case, but just physically visit the property.
Yeah, whatever you can.
Exactly. You can look for creative financing. Again, it's somewhat difficult. You need to, the best case, if you can have a single person that's willing to get engaged with you, and maybe even on the first one, take like a profit split or something.
Yep.
And then knowing your nuances to where you are operating, because it is different literally by province and by municipality.
Yep.
So just making sure you have that really well down, because I got lucky. I don't think nowadays real estate is so heavily traded across the entire country that it would be very difficult to get lucky at this point. But on that note, and this is like a little, I'm not going to say a secret sauce, but I think a major tip, because most people now are like, well, this is already played out now. The auctions are really busy. The prices go really high.
Yep.
It's hard to actually get a huge win here. And I disagree. If you look at this in the way that you want to make a win, what you need to be doing is monitoring like crazy every single property that comes up for auction. And then you need to go and find the person that owns them, because when they first get listed and they're going up for auction, oftentimes a lot of people still live in the property. Or you find the person that owns it and you go and talk to them. And like, just think about this, okay? If someone's losing their house, it's worth $400,000, they owe $250,000 on it. You can go to them and say, hey, I'll buy your house right now, prevent you from having to file bankruptcy, and I'll pay off all your credit cards.
Yep. So
maybe I'll pay you $275,000. You're now coming out with a clean slate. You don't have to go through this whole process. You don't have to lose everything. It's actually a way to save it. And if you do that and you are relentless and you're constantly shopping, you'll probably get 1 to 2 properties a year. And I bet you can make a couple $100,000 doing that.
Yep.
Again, you got to keep in mind, 98% of the time, it's not going to work. But if you just keep doing them, I know there's a few people that that's what they do full time, and they just go and visit it. Now, I started doing that for a bit, and I would get there and I'd talk to the homeowner and like, oh, actually so-and-so just came by. And I'm like, no way, he already beat me to it. Because he had checked the listings the day before and immediately drove over there, knocked on the door, talked to them, and heard he struck a deal. And he said, yeah, I'm going to pay off your credit card. I'm going to pay off your loan on the house, and I'll give you $10,000 to get your life restarted.
Yep.
And so you're beating the auction process. And that's really what you have to do now, because once it makes it to the auction, it's much too public. But I say that things do slip through. Like There might be a snowstorm, nobody goes.
Yep.
And the other thing is 90% of people now assume that it's too busy, and so they don't go. So don't count anything out. I just say all this because I hear a lot of people with the mindset like, oh, it's already played out. And I don't think that's the case.
Got to be persistent.
You have to be persistent.
Especially with all the uncertainty in the market right now. Like you said, people might just be like, I'm not going to bother with that.
Exactly.
But maybe that's the mindset of 90% of other people there.
Exactly.
So, anybody who's had experience with auctions in the past would really encourage you to share your experiences with us. We'd love to chat about it or answer any questions you may have. Appreciate you all tuning in. Please do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. And we'd really appreciate some 5-star reviews. I think we're still in the single digits for 5-star reviews, so we gotta bump that up. And even if you could leave a review for us, that'd be fantastic. We'd be happy to give you a shout out on the show as well, because we want to continue to grow and hopefully help you guys out in your real estate journeys.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys. It's Neal, your co-host and co-founder at Keystone Mortgage Investment Corp. and Director of Investor Relations. I'm also a real estate agent, real estate investor, and business owner.
And your co-host and co-founder of Keystone Mortgage Investment Corporation, Ryan McNeil. Keystone MIC is licensed under the Mortgage Regulations Act of Nova Scotia, license number 3000844, and through FCMB, license 89280. Keep in mind, the views of this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not financial advice.